Oh yes, I'll see you in the rapture. I'll see you in the rapture. I'll see you at the meeting in the air.
This is Evangelist Henry Walker. Welcome to the podcast. I want to continue a message from the last podcast about the rapture hints on Mount Sinai during Pentecost. And also I want to talk about the creation calendar. But let's go to Father in prayer first. Father, I thank you for another opportunity to minister to your people, Father. I ask you to use me just the way you want, Father. Let me say only what you want me to say, nothing more and nothing less. Help people, Father, to open up their spirits and not only receive the word, but study the word for themselves. And Father, we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yeshua, by the blood of Yeshua. I want to continue from the last podcast concerning Mount Sinai, Pentecost. There is a delay between my last podcast and this podcast because of internet problems in my area, so I apologize. And as I mentioned on the last podcast, when you overlay the constellations that were in effect on April 8th with that solar eclipse over the Red Sea and Mt.Sinai, it fits perfectly. You have the constellations, Pisces, the fish, which is a type of us believers. Then you had the constellation Cetus, the red dragon, who wants to devour the fish. And you have Venus, the bright and morning star, right on Mount Sinai. And so we were talking about the possibility of the rapture happening on Pentecost on the Jewish calendar, which would be Sivan 6, June 11th and June 12th. But we're going to go into it deeper now and see exactly what the Father is saying and the hints that he's giving as to the rapture by what happened on Mount Sinai with Moses. And we also talked about, on the last podcast, about the number 153, about the 153 fish that were caught in John chapter 21 after Yeshua rose from the dead. We mentioned that there were 3 feasts that the males had to be in the temple in Jerusalem every year. The first day of unleavened bread, and the 15th of Nisan, the first month, and so that comes up to 151. Then we talked about tabernacles, which is on the 15th day of the 7th month, and you come up to 157. But then you talk about Pentecost, which is on Sivan 15th, on the 3rd month, Sivan, and you come up to 153. And so there's definitely a relationship between Pentecost, Mount Sinai, and the rapture, because in John 21, some of the fish were taken out of the Sea of Galilee, and the rapture is not for everybody. It's for those who have surrendered everything to the Father, have asked the Father to come into their spirits, mortify the deeds of the flesh, fill them with the Spirit, and every day make them more and more like Yeshua, bringing the fruit of the Spirit out of their lives. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. So that 153, Pentecost, being the 15th day of the 3rd month, is really very indicative of the rapture. So we want to study more what happened on Mount Sinai with Moses and see where the Father leads us. So go with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 19. And while you're turning there, remember, if you enjoy these podcasts, tell other people about these podcasts, share, subscribe, hit the like button, and leave me a comment. That would really be appreciated. And also my website is henrywalker.org, and it's about maybe 300 written messages on there. And it's 2 free books on the bottom of the message page. You can just download. One is called Noon, and the other one is The Trinity, Really a Mystery, explaining the Trinity. So the book of Exodus, chapter 19. Again, looking into what happened on Mount Sinai and what does the Father want us to glean from that event that happened there. And how does it point to the rapture? Does it give us a hint as to which particular day the rapture could happen? In Exodus chapter 19, in verse 1, in the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. It was Sivan 3, the 3rd month, the 3rd day, when they came to Mount Sinai. And here's where the Father told the Jewish people that he chose them to be his bride. Now he did that in the first week of creation. But here he's telling them. He said in verse 11, be ready against the third day. For the third day, Yahweh will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And then thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, take heed to yourselves, that you go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever touches the mount shall surely be put to death. Verse 15, Moses said unto the people, be ready against the third day, come not at your wives. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning, that there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceedingly loud, so that all the people that were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with the Father, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. So originally I always thought, and probably a lot of people thought too, that the Ten Commandments were given at that time. But no. Just recognize too that the trumpet was going to sound from Mount Sinai. Go to chapter 24. Remember we talked about on the last podcast about going north from Mount Sinai, you hit the Dead Sea, and I believe that the trumpet's going to sound for the rapture from Mount Sinai, and we were taken in the rapture, and north from Mount Sinai is the Dead Sea, and we know that the dead in Yeshua shall rise first, and we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet Yeshua in the air, and so shall we ever be with Yeshua. Now the clouds are very important. And to the right is the Dead Sea. And we'll be talking about the Father's calendar that he created, and it's the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar. But right above that to the left is Mount Hermon. Yeshua went to that mountain 2 times. That's the same mountain that Enoch talked about in his book. And Jude referred back to the book of Enoch. That's where some of the fallen angels came down on Mount Hermon, and 200 of them, according to the book of Enoch, and they had relations with some of the women, and that's where the Nephilim came from. And so I believe the trumpet will sound from Mount Sinai, and we'll be going, and at that Mount Hermon is when we will assemble with Yeshua. So he's going to announce to Satan at Mount Hermon that this is my bride, I'm taking him, you got power for 7 years. The tribulation, then I'm coming back, and you will be defeated. So that's at Mount Hermon. We covered that on the last podcast, but here in Exodus chapter 24, in verse 12, and Yahweh said unto Moses, come up to me into the mount, and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone, and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. So he didn't give the 10 Commandments on Sivan 6 in Exodus chapter 19. And there's a book of Jubilees. It's a 50-chapter book which we talked about on the last podcast. And in it is recorded that, first of all, Pentecost is on Sivan 15, which fits in perfectly, as I mentioned, with the 2 other feasts and 153 fish. See, the Father had 3 feasts where the males had to be in Jerusalem in the temple, and it would make no spiritual sense that they had 2 of them on the 15th and 1 on the 6th, Sivan 6. It's not like the Father to do something like that. So it's a 3 feasts on the 15th, and of course, as I mentioned, Pentecost is 153. It refers to the fish that were caught in John 21, and it's a hint on Pentecost about the rapture. And we did talk about him possibly coming on June 11th, June 12th, which is Sivan 6 on the Jewish calendar, to let the Jewish people know that I'm taking my bride. They rejected him, and he went to the Gentiles. But it's something deeper. In verse 15, and Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. We're going to meet him together in the clouds at the rapture. And the presence of Yahweh abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the 7th day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and the sight of the presence of Yahweh was like devouring fire on the top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud and got him up into the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So in the book of Jubilees, it's recorded that Moses met with the Father on Sivan 16, the day after the commandments were given. But it's very interesting that this meeting took place on the 7th day. And the 7th day is the Sabbath. So many people say, well, I believe in the Sabbath. Some people say, I believe in Sunday. We have to believe in both of them. Both of those days are important. And the seventh day, I believe, in my opinion, that when Yeshua comes back, it'll be on the Sabbath. It could be on a Sabbath on a feast day or just a regular weekly Sabbath. If you go to Leviticus 23 with me to the right, Leviticus 23, see, the enemy wants that dividing line between the Sabbath and the first day of the week. And it's not there. Leviticus 23, just go to the right. In verse 1, and Yahweh said unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, concerning the feast of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be set apart convocations, even those on my feast. This is the first feast that he talks about. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest, a set apart convocation, and you shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings. Remember, Yeshua said that I'm Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is special time for fellowshipping with the Father, and we can fellowship any time, but he set aside the Sabbath for special fellowship. In verse 4, these are the feasts of Yahweh, even set apart convocations. In verse 5, in the 14th day of the first month even is Yahweh's Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. And in the first day you shall have a set apart convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. See, every feast day, if you read on, has a Sabbath in it, a Sabbath rest. So what I'm talking about is that it's an excellent possibility that Yeshua can come back for us on the Sabbath, a weekly Sabbath or a Sabbath of a feast day. And so we know about the Sabbath. It's from Friday 6 p.m. to Saturday 6 p.m. And during the week, for those people who have surrendered everything to the Father and want him to make them more and more like Yeshua, he works on us during the week. And he points out things in our lives that he wants to take out of our lives. It's like a pre-op spiritual surgery. And on the Sabbath, during that time, from Friday 6 p.m. to Saturday 6 p.m., is when he wants to do that operation and get us ready for the first day of the week, which starts on Saturday at 6 p.m. And he's going to give us more power when we rest in him on that Sabbath. Why is there such a dividing line between the two? Yeshua went into the synagogue on the Sabbath, as his custom was. In Luke chapter 4, verse 16, Paul preached to the Gentiles on the Sabbath, Acts 13, verse 40 to 44. In the millennium, as recorded in Isaiah 66, verse 23, from one Sabbath to another Sabbath, nations will come to Jerusalem to worship the King. That's in that 1,000-year period of time, known as the millennium. The Sabbath was given before there's ever a Jew. It's for all of us. It was written with the finger of the Father. The fourth commandment can never be done away with. There's that beautiful link between the Sabbath and Sunday, the first day of the week. Go with me to Genesis chapter 1. Go to the left of Genesis chapter 1. See, whatever the Father asks us to do on the first day of the week, Sunday, we need to do it. But we can't bypass the Sabbath. We need that rest to have that power coming out of us for the week. And again, the week starts on Saturday at 6 p.m. Remember in Genesis, evening and morning were the first day. The day begins at evening, not 12:01 a.m. from the pagans, but it's 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. This is a 24-hour day period. And Yeshua taught about 12 hours of the day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then the 12 hours of the night, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., are the night watches. And these are brought out in my book, Noon, on my website, henrywalker.org, which is free. You can download it, as I mentioned. But in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, Elohim created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of Elohim moved upon the face of the waters. And Elohim said, let there be light. And there was light. And Elohim saw the light that it was good, and Elohim divided the light from the darkness. Man, the power on the first day. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and evening and morning were the first day. Look what he did on the first day. The power to separate Satan from us. And that separation is still there. We need to reaffirm it if Satan comes against us, reaffirm that the Father separated us from darkness. What's happening in the world? The world is trying, through the spirit of Antichrist, to bring more and more people into darkness. Immorality, lowering of moral values, and it's starting with the family structure. Trying to demasculine men, upset the family structure. But no, families need to get together and pray, read the Word, and come together as one and worship and study the Word as one. So we see here that the first day of the week is very important. It's when he separated light from darkness. In chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, say that with me, the seventh day, Elohim ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And Elohim blessed the seventh day, and set it apart, because that in it he had rested from all his work which Elohim created and made. You see, so the Sabbath is the day that he set up to fellowship with him. On the seventh day, he walked with his creation. He fellowshiped with them, showed them what he created and what their job was. But in Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, now the serpent was more subtle than any of the beasts of the field which Yahweh Elohim had made, and he said unto the woman, yea, had Elohim said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? So he tempted Eve and Adam very successfully. In verse 8, and Adam and Eve heard the voice of Yahweh Elohim walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Abraham and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh Elohim among the trees of the garden. That next Sabbath, in my opinion, is when here comes the Father wanting to fellowship with his people on the Sabbath, and Satan got there first. They couldn't wait for the Father to come and fellowship with them, and they gave in to Satan. So the Sabbath is a special time for the Father fellowshipping with us, and us with him. If you go with me to the book of Acts, chapter 16. So again, I'm talking about the relationship between the Sabbath and the first day of the week, and how it's been totally misunderstood. And there's been dividing lines between people who worship on the Sabbath and people who worship on Sunday. And it's just the enemy's plan. There's a special relationship, as I mentioned. In Acts chapter 16, Paul and others with him went to Philippi, part of Macedonia. In verse 13, and on a Sabbath, we went out of the city by a riverside where prayer was wont to be made, and we sat down and spoke unto the women which resorted thither. And a certain woman named Lydia, a seller of purple of the city of Thyatira, which worshipped Elohim, heard us, whose heart Yeshua opened, and that she attended unto the things which are spoken of Paul. So it's on the Sabbath now. In verse 16, there's a certain woman that was possessed with the spirit of divination, and in verse 17, she was saying, these men are the servants of the Most High Elohim. And it's the way in her voice that she was lifting up the servants and putting down Elohim. Paul recognized this and cast the devil out. Spirit of divination, which is the spirit of Python. And Paul and Silas were put into prison. In verse 25, at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto Elohim, and the prisoners heard them. Incidentally, we looked in Genesis 1 and mentioned about Elohim said, Elohim created. In chapter 2, we see Lord God, which is Yahweh Elohim. So Elohim means that I have all this power. These are all his attributes, a plurality of attributes that the Father has. But when he puts Yahweh Elohim, it means not only do I have that power, but I want to use it for my creation. And Yahweh is an action verb. It's I am that I am. Whatever we need him to be, he's there to help us to do it. And he's there to work with us and for us if necessary. And Yahweh, as I mentioned, is a verb. It's not a noun. It's an action verb. When you surrender everything to the Father and on his road of making you more and more like Yeshua every day, then when you use the name Yahweh, he actively moves on your behalf. So many times it talks about the name of the Lord, the name of the Lord. But what is his name? His name is Yahweh. And the son's name is Yahshua. Yahshua. Yah is the family name. Y-A-H. It's so beautiful. I was ministering in Freeport, the Bahamas, and I was talking about this, and the pastor went home that night, and he went in his room and started praising the Father by using the name of Yahweh, and his room filled up with presence of Yahweh. And Satan wanted to keep that from all believers. We got to know his name. He's got so many attributes, wonderful, counselor, Prince of Peace and so forth, but his name is Yahweh. I am that I am. I never change. I'll be there for you. If nobody else is there with you, I will be for you. Somebody needs to hear that today. Whatever situation you're in, and nobody seems to be able to help you, just call upon the name of Yahweh after you surrender everything to him. And verse 25, again, this was on midnight, which is on Saturday night. This is the first day of the week. They sang praises, and the prisoners heard them. So they were resting on the Sabbath, but at midnight on Saturday night is the first day of the week. And what happened in verse 26? And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were open, and everyone's bands were loosed. And the keeper of the prison, he wanted to kill himself because he thought all the prisoners were gone, but no, they were there. Verse 30, he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And he and his whole family got saved. So you can see the relationship between the Sabbath and the first day of the week. Don't bypass the Sabbath. And I believe that some Sabbath, whether it's a weekly Sabbath or a feast day Sabbath, when we're resting in him, and he's doing that spiritual operation, that he can just take us right up in the rapture. And so that's what the Father's hinting by that overlay of the eclipse of April 8th onto the Red Sea and Mt.Sinai. Because his people escaped on the Red Sea. They came to the Mount Sinai. At the base of the mountain, they assembled together, which is like the Hebrew word mikvah, assembling together. But then Moses was taken up in a cloud, and the Ten Commandments were given on Sivan 15. On the 16th of Sivan, he met with him. So it's just so beautiful when you see the relationship there. And I also believe, as I mentioned in other podcasts, the rapture could happen at 3 p.m. on Eastern time, which is 8 a.m. Jerusalem time, on some Sabbath. Whatever area you're in, you just have to go back to Jerusalem time. Yeshua died at 3 p.m., the 9th hour of the day. He rose on the Sabbath at 3 p.m., which is another reason I believe the rapture could happen on the Sabbath, 72 hours later. Remember, in 31 AD is when Yeshua died on a Wednesday, April 25th. And if he had 2,000 years to 2031, that's his second coming, but subtract the 7 years of tribulation, you're down to 2024. So I'm just saying, ask the Father to confirm what I'm saying from the Word, and be in his presence on the Sabbath. Let him work on you, and in some Sabbath, he's going to take us all that are ready with him. It's so beautiful. And I believe it's 3 p.m. He died at 3 p.m. He rose at 3 p.m. And in my message, when was Yeshua born, when did he die, when did he rise, at henrywalker.org, a written message, I mentioned the fact that I believe that at 3 p.m. is when he was born. Because he was born in that cave, the Tower of the Flock down below, where they kept the Passover lambs. And at 3 p.m., they had to go out and be sacrificed. And I believe that's when he was born, that no more lambs need to be sacrificed. He's to sacrifice once and for all. And I believe he ascended at 3 p.m. too. Of course, that's my opinion, based on what I know of the Father and his Word. What I want to talk about now is this creation calendar, the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar, and why it's so important. And you can access the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar by going to DSS, Dead Sea Scrolls, dsscalendar.org, and just click on 2024. And the calendar is so very important. The Father created this calendar. There's no human involvement. And Zadok, the priest for David, he and the other priests studied this calendar and followed the calendar. And this calendar was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. And the Essenes had it. Zadok is somebody that, again, was with David. Whenever David was going through something, he was with David. Now, the current calendar that the Jewish people are using is not correct. First of all, it's based on the moon, a lunar calendar. The Father's calendar, the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar, is based on the sun, on the solar calendar. And you might ask, what about the mention of the new moon in the word? Moon should have been translated month, the new month. And the Pharisees' calendar goes back, way back to when the Maccabees defeated the Syrians. See, the Syrians pushed their calendar on the Jews, and they kept it, even to now. And so the calendar is really flawed. And it's the same Pharisees that developed the Talmud as writings based on oral teaching, rabbis and other people. And the Talmud believes that the Messiah is not going to be born of a virgin, number one. It believes that the Messiah will not suffer for our sins and pay the price for our sins, number two. Number three, the Messiah is just a man, not the Father manifest in the flesh. So with that in mind, as a believer, I will not go back to that Jewish calendar because it's false. And in those days, there's so many of the priests that went in on the Day of Atonement, they went into the inner place in the tabernacle. So many were killed because they were going on the wrong day. So you can study that calendar. It's very, very important. I'll go over it more in future podcasts. If you go to that calendar, on Nisan 26, April 14th, was the Feast of First Fruits. And if you count 50 days, you come up to Sivan 15, or June 2nd, which is Pentecost. I also went back to the calendar, the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar, the original calendar of creation. And on Nisan 26, which is April 14th, Gregorian date, that's the Feast of First Fruits. And 40 days later is Sivan 6, or May 24th. So Yeshua ascended on Sivan 6, the same day that the Father came down on Mount Sinai, and the people assembled at the base of the mountain. And we'll talk more about this creation calendar on the next podcast. Remember, you can access this calendar at dsscalendar.org. Just click on 2024. Just pray about what I'm saying about the relationship between the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, and the first day of the week. It's not to be divided. The Sabbath leads into more power on the first day of the week. But we got to rest with the Father, allow Him to take any junk out of our lives, do the operation. And I believe that some Sabbath, He's going to take us from that beautiful rest, doing that operation, and just take us up in the rapture. I believe that's what the Father's trying to show in that overlay of the April 8th eclipse at the Red Sea and Mt.Sinai. And just to remind some of you, this is a pro-life ministry, and we believe that life begins at conception. The Father is the agent of conception. In every podcast, I pray for the babies in the womb. And remember, with the babies in the womb, their hearts begin to beat around 18 days, and around 4 months, their hearts are pumping about 25 quarts of blood per day. So I'm going to pray for the babies in the womb. If you want to join me, Father, I ask you to touch the babies in the womb, Father. Bring them to a full birth, Father. And we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yeshua, by the blood of Yeshua. And if any of you listening out there had an abortion, repent, ask the Father to forgive you, and go on and follow Him. Don't look back. Go into your purpose and your destiny. And also I mention on every podcast, if Satan or your flesh is giving you any thoughts that are contrary to the Father's word, just say out loud, say, Yeshua, I thank you for that crown of thorns that was around your head. That was for me. That means my mind is protected by your blood. I only think your thoughts. And give those thoughts to the Father and go on. So again, thank you for listening to this podcast. Tell other people about this podcast. And remember to next time, this is Evangelist Henry Walker saying, greater is the Father in you, your daddy, the King of the universe, than anything or anybody in the world.
Oh, yeah.